Welcome, everyone, to the Rosenbach's annual Bloomsday virtual talk. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the home of the most complete manuscript of James Joyce's Ulysses. And as part of our Bloomsday celebrations every year, we invite a James Joyce scholar or creator to share an aspect of Joyce's masterpiece, Ulysses. And this year, we bring you Dr. Vicki Mahaffey. There we go. Hi, Vicki. Oh, you're still muted. There we go. Welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before we get started, everyone, let me take care of some business and then we'll get to the talk. You can find videos of our annual Bloomsday virtual talks from previous years on our YouTube channel. Colm Tobin talked about music in Ulysses. Claire Hutton talked about women and the making of Ulysses. And Michael Barsanti last year talked about Ulysses and the Great War. I'll put those links to those in the chat. Lots of other Bloomsday content on our Rosenbach YouTube channel as well. And we invite all of you to join us for our annual celebration of Bloomsday on June 16th. Every year, we gather together to read from Joyce's Ulysses. It's a beloved and foundational event for this institution that Vicki Mahaffey was one of the originators and helped us originally put these together. We are delighted to announce several updates to the festival this year. Inspired by feedback we received from you at last year's event with and we've added some additional special events. We think that the way we're shaping it this year will invite more participation and a greater access to the Rosenbach's collections. The public reading of Ulysses, which used to happen on the street out front, will now happen in the garden, in the back garden of the Rosenbach, and that'll start at 1 p.m. And for the first time ever, we just opened the reader spots to anyone to read. And of course, those spots filled up in just a few hours. I'm very excited that so many Ulysses lovers will get to read for the first time this year. While the readings take place in the garden, we will have presentations in our library, in our galleries. We have a new gallery opening this year, Treasures from the Rosenbach's Collection, History of the Material Text. And then after the garden readings will end at 6 o'clock, and then we'll get to go out front on Delancey Place, and we'll have Molly's soliloquy at sunset at 7 o'clock. And Philadelphia actor Kirsten Quinn is going to return and do that as well, with also some musical performances. The Molly reading will be live streamed on our YouTube channel, so you can watch that. If you're not in the Philadelphia area or can't make it in for Bloomsday, you can watch the Molly reading on the YouTube channel. And there will also be some Bloomsday musical performances held at the Academy of Vocal Arts during the day at a couple different times during the day on June 16th, where you can hear all the wonderful Bloomsday songs that we used to have on the street as well. So I will put the link to information about this year's Bloomsday in the chat as well. And I hope you can make it out this year. It will be a lot of fun. Before we begin, thank you for everyone here joining us live. We bring this program to you for free. So if you would like to help support the Rosenbach, either by donation or by becoming a member, you can do so by visiting our website. Your support helps us care for our collections, like the Ulysses manuscript that we have and the rest of our world-class Joyce collection, but also your support helps us bring more programs like this to you. So that link is also in the chat for you. If you're watching the recording, I ask you to please like our channel, like this video, and subscribe to our channel. And everything else I've said goes for you too. And now, as we do this today, as you're watching live, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A component of Zoom on the Zoom interface there, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. But if you're working on a device that it's just not easy to access and it's easier to put them in the chat, you can put questions in the chat. I'll find them there too as well. Let's begin. Vicki Mahaffey's new book is The Joyce of Everyday Life, published by Bucknell University Press. She's also the author of two other books related to James Joyce, as well as two edited collections and at least 50 articles. She received her PhD from Princeton University, taught at the University of Pennsylvania for almost 30 years. She is also a board member of the also a member of the Board of Trustees of the International James Joyce Foundation. While at Penn, Vicki taught courses at the Rosenbach and was involved and still does. And we're so happy that you returned to do those. And was also involved in the planning of the annual Bloomsday celebrations. She is currently the Kirkpatrick Professor of English and Gender at Women's Studies at the University of Illinois. Vicki, I'm so happy to have such a good friend of the Rosenbach here for this talk.
Thank you so much, Ed, and thanks to everyone at the Rosenbach and to all of you for coming.
Well, we have quite a crowd to watch this year. This is the most we've had for for the live talk. So thanks to you, Vicki, that everybody's turning out for this. That's really nice. You'll do the presentation and then I'll come off and then I'll come back on at the end and we'll field some questions. Sound good? You ready to start?
I'm ready.
All righty. Let me get the PowerPoint up here. And there we go. Can you see that, Vicki?
Yep. Okay. What I hope to do over the next 40 minutes or so is to show how the vaunted difficulty of Joyce's work is intimately bound up with its pleasure and importance. But I'm going to start with two poems. You probably know Percy Bysshe Shelley's famous sonnet, Ozymandias, describing a colossal, wrecked statue of a man probably based on Ramesses II, now king of an empty desert. Next slide, please. Only his trunkless legs and a detached, shattered visage remain. Shelley describes that stone face as stamped with passions that are still alive, a frown, a wrinkled lip, a sneer of cold command. The famous final line quotes the inscription carved on the statue's pedestal. Look upon ye works, look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. Next slide, please. In one of the sections of Notes Toward a Supreme Fiction, Wallace Stevens picks up where Shelley left off by having a woman approach Ozymandias. Slide. She strips herself naked and begs him to clothe her in words, thereby making her precious, perfect, and loved. She calls herself the contemplated spouse standing before an inflexible order. But Ozymandias refuses her request, explaining, quote, the spouse, the bride, is never naked. A fictive covering weaves always glistening from the heart and mind. The object of our desire is never naked. A fictive covering weaves always glistening from the heart and mind. The spouse is the individual. He, the embodiment of social and political power, simultaneously larger than life and broken. What he tells her with his posthumous wisdom is that we cannot see the naked real because it always wears a fictive covering. Each of us is already a fictional character, even when we think we are stripped bare. We're all inevitably clothed with illusions, with words, with stories. Everyday life is just one of these illusions that cloak the real. And this brings me to the first thing I want to say about Joyce. Joyce's works can't be read, by which I mean understood, enjoyed, learned from, by those who believe in a naked truth that is easily accessible. The wrecked, isolated Ozymandias knows that this is what people want, though. The sneering tyrant cannot adorn them with the signs of imperishable value they demand. He can't even lower the price of eggs. Next slide. asking to be clothed with his words and love and thereby rendered perfect. They can't see that their hearts and minds are already covered with glistening fictions. The daily existence we experience as ordinary is one such covering. What lies beneath is an occluded realm, an occulted world, animated by centuries of experience that has been silvered over by a film of habit. That world is never naked, but it can be mined. The Joyce of Everyday Life is an attempt to demonstrate how to do such mining, which, while not exactly easy, richly rewards the effort. To say it another way, in the Joyce of Everyday Life, I've tried to use Joyce's entire corpus to show how he himself read. There are other kinds of coverings that can't be easily removed, but that can be rendered more translucent, such as the usual narratives about identity. Our names, our countries, races, sexes, all have stories attached to them. At the simplest level, identities are often suggested by names. Here are a few examples taken from my own experience. Mr. Tinkle becomes a urologist, Mr. Butts, a proctologist, Ms. Grinberg, a dentist, Mr. Looney, a psychiatrist. In a more complex way, though, identity is forged through the way we identify with different stories. This is the first thing Joyce shows his reader at the beginning of A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which begins with a fairy tale told by the infant protagonist's father. Next slide. Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, there was a moo cow coming down along the road. And this moo cow that was coming along the road met a nice little baby named Baby Tuckoo. The child first learns who he is through that story. He was Baby Tuckoo. The moo cow coming down the road is how the father who tells the story has depicted the lactating mother. This is just the first of many different stories that the protagonist, Stephen Dedalus, unconsciously uses to define himself as the novel progresses. Next slide. He becomes a Greek or Roman hero, the ousted politician Charles Stewart Parnell, the poet Byron, the fallen Lucifer, and Daedalus himself, the Greek inventor whose name he bears. He even identifies himself with Jesus. Next slide. But we rarely see Stephen become real, compassionate, or fully alive. To do that, he would have to learn not only to recognize, but to read the fictional stories that he has unconsciously used to define or clothe himself. He would have to become more self-aware and self-accepting. That's a challenge for all of us. Joyce's novel was called A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, but it could have been called A Portrait of the Reader as a young person or as an older person. All of Joyce's works are always directed at the reader, and they consistently challenge or provoke the reader to read him or herself more clearly, more honestly, with greater acceptance and even humor. His fiction is designed to help readers who are so inclined to defictionalize themselves. Like the writer Angela Carter, he might be said to be in the demythologizing business. Joyce uses a younger version of himself, Stephen, to reveal how fictions of identity shift as we grow older. But what Stephen is never able to do in Joyce's novels is to see himself as an evolving series of self-aggrandizing fictions. His lack of self-awareness precludes him from laughing out of sheer love of life and from loving anyone else. In Ulysses, Joyce's reminder of the importance of being able to see oneself from the outside takes the form of a line from the Scottish poet Robert Burns's To a Louse. I'll quote from the English translation. "Oh, would some power the gift give us to see ourselves as others see us. It would from many a blunder free us and foolish notion. Joyce would go further. It allows us to realize ourselves, to become more real, to discover the hidden joys of everyday life, and maybe even to learn to love. In Portrait, Stephen's mother prays that he will learn what the heart is and what it feels. To become an artist, or even a fully developed person, one must recognize one's identity as a heuristic, changing series of fictions, remembering that a fiction can be true, just not in the literal sense. One of the reasons psychoanalysis can be so effective is that it helps the analysand perceive the fictional nature of the constraints that are causing symptoms, and to help him read and ultimately rewrite himself and his history in relation to his current circumstances and desires. To return to Joyce, though, his short story collection, Dubliners, is primarily diagnostic rather than reparative. It focuses on people who have gotten stuck in their stories. Few of these characters learn to see themselves, and when they do, it is in brief flashes. The boy in the short story Araby is one famous example. After having undertaken a chivalrous quest for the girl he has romanticized, he suddenly sees himself in the darkness as, quote, a creature driven and derided by vanity, and his eyes burned with anguish and anger. Next slide. The word creature here designates a fictional or imaginary being, particularly a frightening one. In the darkness, the boy sees himself as not real, and he suddenly understands that what he felt for Mangan's sister was a fantasy. He calls himself vain because his self-casting as a chivalrous knight on a quest had served to inflate his ego, idealize his love object, and to mistake a fiction for a reality. Instead of the exotic Oriental bazaar that Araby was advertised to be, he finds an English-run commercial venture. At the end of the final story of Dubliners, the dad, Gabriel, suddenly sees his love for his wife as little more than clownish lust. Next slide. When he imagines the risk taken by his wife's young lover, he thinks he had never felt like that himself towards any woman, but that he knew that such a feeling must be love. Eerily, the ghost of the dead lover appears to him as being more alive than Gabriel himself. Even Stephen Dedalus, at the end of Portrait of the Artist, has a moment of self-awareness after talking to the young woman he's attracted to. He writes in his diary that after saying something cutting to her, he turns on what he calls his spiritual heroic refrigerating apparatus and starts talking rapidly about himself. He makes a sudden revolutionary-looking gesture, and people start looking at them, and he sees himself briefly through their eyes. Quote, I must have looked like a fellow throwing a handful of peas into the air, unquote. He's humorously recognized and punctured his own posturing, and the result is surprising, even to him. He feels a sudden liking for the young woman, and he writes, quote, it seems a new feeling to me. Then in that case, all the rest, all that I thought, and all that I felt, all the rest before now, in fact, and he doesn't finish the sentence. If he had, he might have said, weren't real. They were self-aggrandizing stories. But Stephen brushes away the thought. Oh, give it up, old chap. Sleep it off. What readers often fail to realize is that Stephen, whom his mother says has read too much, hasn't yet learned to read at all, really, because he typically can't bear to see his self-constructions as postures. As the narrator puts it, he retains, quote, nothing of all he read save that which seemed to him an echo or prophecy of his own state, end quote. He reads to confirm but not challenge his self-fictionalizations. He's not alone. That's how most of us read. We read for escape, for entertainment, for knowledge about others in the world, but not typically for new or surprising insights into ourselves. But readers of Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake can't read that way. That's why these books are so widely disliked, the most disliked famous books of the 20th century. Oscar Wilde once said, if we find a book unreadable, it is new. If we find a book immoral, it is true. Ulysses was both. Although he has trouble relinquishing fantasies that he is himself heroic, Stephen does, however, recognize the power of social and national fictions, or ideologies, describing them as traps that imprison the soul. Stephen was being pressured to adopt the then almost defunct Irish language, to become an Irish nationalist, to defend Catholic morality over the truth he found in art. In short, he was being asked to take a side in several divisive cultural battles, and he was determined not to take sides in such a unilateral way. As Joyce writes in Finnegan's Wake, that is how, quote, our oxygen has gotten a hold of half their world. This is a problem affecting all of us very strongly at the moment. We too are being challenged to grab our half of the world, Democrat or Republican, female or male, black or white, gay or straight. Transgendered people are so threatening to some because they seem to have changed sides. Even as a young man, Stephen understood something that the current administration in the US would deny. He knows that race and gender, like Catholicism versus Protestantism, Irishness versus Englishness, are socially constructed categories that artificially simplify and divide people. But he also knows that these fictions have very real effects in the world. The confusion between the artificial and the real is toxic. It recalls what Ibram X. Kendi said about race. Next slide. That it is a made-up category that has very real effects. In other words, quote, race does not exist, but racism does, end quote. Joyce challenged racism by playfully turning it into a car race in Dubliners and then a horse race in Ulysses. Racism is a complex social structure like sexism. It is woven into the fabric of the status quo, passed down through generations, intensified by greed and self-interest. Races morph from fun, healthy games into racism when winners and losers begin to be defined biologically or ethnically, and when winning begins to carry significant monetary rewards and an increase of prestige. The problem is exacerbated by betting, because then the spectators stand to become winners as well, simply by accurately predicting or prejudging the results. Trump and his henchmen would have us believe the race is a fair one, but Philadelphians aren't apt to forget that the Liberty Bell has always had a crack in it. This takes us to the big break in Joyce's work. I'm calling it a break rather than a breakthrough, because what changes dramatically as we move from a portrait to Ulysses is the nature of the reader's experience. That experience can either be off-putting or it can dramatically expand the reader's previous perspective by exposing the assumptions on which it is based. Dubliners in a portrait can pass as ordinary or conventional works of fiction. The reader can read for plot and not feel a need for deeper understanding. Read this way, Joyce's early work seems well written, but a little pointless and even depressing. Ulysses, however, can't pass as an ordinary novel. It disorients its readers by disrupting the conventions that we have learned to rely on for ready access to meaning. Joyce has darkened the surface of his narrative, leaving the unsuspecting reader rather like Odysseus at sea. Why did he do this? And why would a reader put up with it? The big challenge Joyce set himself was to turn his fiction into a mirror, so that a receptive, curious reader could see him or herself in it. To put it another way, Joyce crafted fiction that can allow a reader to recognize the extent to which he is himself a fiction, perhaps even dead in the sense of programmed, driven by automatic or habitual responses. But this is not an accusation designed to be judgmental or shaming. It is comic, which is to say that it is common to most people. Weirdly, we are being invited to see and enjoy our own blind spots. Enjoy them because it's delightful to suddenly appreciate new things. As Stephen puts it in Ulysses, there is nothing shameful about mistakes, which should be portals of discovery. In general, novels allow us to rely on our prior judgments to read with ease. But when those assumptions are spotlighted and scrutinized, the result is amusement at our own previous narrowness of vision. I laughed my way through the writing of the Joyce of Everyday Life because the new, larger perspectives that Joyce offers, without judgment, open up a multitude of fresh possibilities and license a host of unexpected connections. As Wallace Stevens put it, life's nonsense pierces us with strange relation. Here are a few examples of how people can see themselves reflected in Ulysses. Ulysses makes it possible for us to wonder about what we consider heroic by violating expectations we didn't even know we had. Joyce paints his young male protagonist against the shadows of two princes, Homer's Telemachus and Shakespeare's Hamlet. But he then strips princeliness of its glamour by identifying them with Stephen Dedalus, a scrawny intellectual who is poor, physically dirty, infested with lice, and a coward. Unlike Telemachus in the Odyssey, who risks death in an effort to find out what happened to his father, Stephen struggles blindly with the sea changes of language and philosophy, only to drink himself into a stupor and go berserk in a whorehouse. Similarly, Bloom redefines the picture of the mature male hero based on Odysseus by being a cuckold who avoids his feelings about being betrayed. Defying the traditions of epic and romance, Joyce redefines a mature male hero as cautious, realistic, and empathic, whose bravery consists of realizing that he has inadvertently hurt the people he loves. Joyce parodies the brawny male heroes of popular culture by making the only men in the novel who pride themselves on physical prowess an adulterer and a bigot, Blazes Boylan, and the citizen who tries to crucify Bloom with a cookie tin. We see what an admirable young woman is from the airbrushed self-portrait Gertie McDowell paints of herself in Nausicaa. Indoctrinated by advertisements in women's magazines, she thinks of herself as ivory-like, Greekly perfect, with small feet and hands of finely veined alabaster. She has fashioned herself into, quote, as fair a specimen of winsome Irish girlhood as one can wish to see, virginal, innocent, and longing to minister to the needs of men. Of course, we aren't expecting her to swing her leg so that Bloom can climax to the sight of her underwear. No wonder this is the episode that got Ulysses banned. It should be obvious how Molly violates the ideal of a female heroine, but I want to also emphasize that age is as important as sex for Joyce. The youthful Stephen and Gertie don't manage to see and accept themselves as they are, whereas Bloom and Molly startle us with their willingness to learn and accept when they've screwed up. In Circe, Bloom asks Molly to forgive him, confessing, "Oh, I have been a perfect pig." Such willingness to see and take responsibility for his own flaws makes him able to care for others without the self-absorption of the younger characters. And it makes both Bloom and Molly seem so full of life that fans of Ulysses go to see the street where they lived in Dublin. They consider having kidney for breakfast, and they get together to sing one of the songs Molly will perform in Belfast, Love's Old Sweet Song. Before I go on to a brief discussion of sex and kissing in Joyce, I'd like to take a minute to indicate how much the Rosenbach has contributed to my knowledge of Joyce. For over 40 years, minus a 15-year hiatus when I lived in England and Illinois, I had the privilege to teach courses at the Rosenbach. I love both undergraduates and graduate students, but the people who take courses at the Rosenbach have something they lack: sophisticated minds, a treasure trove of varied life experiences, and warm-hearted engagement with material they chose to get to know better. The first director of the Rosenbach with whom I worked, Stephen Joyce, now a distinguished law professor, is listening tonight. Two of my former students at Penn played major roles at the Rosenbach, Bill Adair and Mike Bersanti. Because of the Rosenbach, I once had the opportunity to fly on a private jet with a small group of people who were bringing the manuscript of Ulysses to Dublin for display at the Chester Beatty Library. One group of students at the Rosenbach turned out to be founding members of the Headlong Dance Company, who mounted a dance version of Ulysses after taking the Ulysses course, which they performed at the Arden Theater. All these experiences working with creative, highly knowledgeable adults with no professional stake in Joyce helped me hone, but also broaden my thinking about his work. One of the chapters of my book was inspired by a woman named Sue Reish, who took my Ulysses course when she was 93. She had spent her adult life while raising kids studying the various references to salmon in Finnegan's Wake, and I wrote the chapter on salmon for her. And then, of course, there is the incomparable Lenny Steiner, who has read Ulysses countless times with great openness and intellectual curiosity, who's taught me much about learning to read more feelingly. When I left Philadelphia, she gave me my own wake, which was not only a fabulous party, but also a playbook for my eventual return, so that I could sing out like Tim Finnegan himself, "Be the thunderin' Jesus, do you think I'm dead?" One of the chapters in the Joyce of Everyday Life is called On Writing by Hand, which is to write, Latin scribere, by hand, manus. And the Rosenbach is particularly rich in such manuscripts. Next slide. Here, courtesy of Ed Pettit, is an image of a page of the Penelope manuscript with Joyce's insertions on the left. Joyce was particularly interested in the embodied aspect of writing, which historically involved not only the human hand, but also the quill of a bird and the skin of a calf. He was also aware of how the composition of literature requires the writer to impersonate others. The focus of this chapter is Joyce's treatment of writing as forgery in Finnegan's Wake. It requires careful craft to duplicate another person's signature, requiring the coordination of more than 20 muscles, some powerful, others as thin as a cat's whisker, to replicate the rhythm of that written emblem of individual uniqueness, the signature. But doing that is a form of identity theft, which Joyce extends to what he does in all his fiction. In this slide, we see Joyce impersonating Molly Bloom. To do that, he's had to imaginatively become another person, changing his sex and his age. In Finnegan's Wake, Joyce pays special attention to the rhythm of dying and being resurrected. People, the day, the year, all participate in that cycle, but so do words. Like aspects of everyday life, words die when they're used too often. It's referred to as semantic satiation. And they can be brought back to our attention by the addition or subtraction of a letter. Puns are one way of reviving words, making us see them again, and so are misspellings. Let me give an example, not from Joyce, but from Elmo's Joyce book. I'm sorry, Elmo's, that's an interesting slip. I'm not going to analyze it, but from Elmo's joke book. Because children's literature delights in celebrating the kinship that unexpectedly connects different words. What fruit does a ghost like best? Blueberries. Why did Snuffy give Big Bird a gift? Because it was his bird day. Ads, too, bring words back to life in memory for commercial purposes. Bloom, the ad man, remembers one that provides an example. Quote, "Tell me where is fancy bread? At Rourke's the baker," it is said. The tune here is a well-known song from Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, repurposed to sell bread and to make those who see it remember the name of Rourke's Bakery. Not only words, but literature can be dead or alive. But literature comes to life only when the reader is actively engaged in decoding it. You can only have a story if something has gone wrong. Similarly, the book can only mirror the reader if something is not right, or if it's unexpected or oblique. Joyce challenges readers to recognize and reevaluate blind spots that are not only individual but cultural, such as illusions about the nature of love, fidelity, purity, or religion. I'll start with love and fidelity, and then go on to something I don't talk about in the book, kissing and sex. People often act as if love was about knowing or possessing the other, just as religion, as a spiritual practice, is frequently confused with the orthodoxy of those who think they have a privileged access to divine truth. Joyce, however, in his only play, Exiles, suggests that love, quote, depends upon the disciplined recollection that the lover does not know or understand the beloved, end quote. Seeing the beloved this way increases receptivity to him or her, and it necessitates accepting the beloved's autonomy and freedom. In other words, we must love as we read by accepting the very real limits of what we can know, understand, and control. A writer can't give the reader freedom. He or she can only write in a way that rewards an open-minded willingness to see familiar things with a new eye, while respecting any disinclination or readiness to do so. It's important to appreciate the immense privilege, both in love and in writing, of, quote, being the brain in contact with which the reader or lover must think or understand. In love, there's a similar sacred privilege in being, quote, the body in contact with which the beloved's body must feel. We learn Joyce's unconventional views about fidelity by looking at his treatment of adultery and its opposite, purity. He urges us to connect adultery with adulteration and to hear the word adult in both of them. We adulterate as we develop into adults. What does this do to women who are adjured to remain pure, or at least they were before the invention of the birth control pill? It suggests that the pinnacle of female desirability can only be maintained through arrested development. If female attractiveness is linked to arrested development, can it ever ripen into adult female sexuality? Does this help to explain the seemingly widespread attraction to the sexuality of children? Joyce goes further by suggesting, as we can see in Gertie McDowell, that the ideal of female youth and purity is, in fact, both comic and obscene. If we accept the idea that adults must adulterate or multiply themselves in order to grow, what does this imply about the need for fidelity from another? What does a person pledge faithfulness to if both lover and loved are becoming multiple as a result of personal and physical growth? If we read Ulysses against the background of Gustave Flaubert's Madame Bovary, one of the inspirations for it, it becomes clear that Joyce saw Flaubert's novel as an indictment of the injunction for women to be pure. It is paradoxically the pursuit of pure, transcendent love that leads Emma Bovary to have successive affairs. She is a romantic, looking for the ideals she was introduced to in novels and, of all things, in church. She doesn't ever see that actual love, love that is real, was something to which she already had access. Her husband, Charles Bovary, was one of the models for Leopold Bloom. He was a cuckold who loved Emma more completely and constantly than any of her lovers, because his love embraced even her shortcomings. He dies holding a lock of her hair, even after he has learned the truth of her adulteries, read all her love letters to other men, and faced financial ruin because of her extravagance. Like Bloom's, his is a love that doesn't despise the ordinary, the everyday. He is an ordinary man who gives evidence of an extraordinary love because he loves what is real. Love of what is hidden, which a psychoanalyst might call the real, which is inaccessible in part, which is accessible in part through humility, openness, and imagination. This is what produces the joy of everyday life. A willingness to love things and people as flawed rather than perfect. Joyce's acceptance of the comprehensiveness, the multiplicity of adult humanity is what enabled him to write a large epic comedy. He knew that compassion for the other starts with the willingness to see one's own imperfections without shame. It is harder for young people to do this, which is why both Stephen Dedalus and Gertie McDowell come across as so incomplete. As Joyce writes about Stephen, quote, pain that was not yet the pain of love fretted his heart. Now to sex. In March of this year, a second move by Iowa lawmakers to remove books from libraries, Senate File 496, was blocked by a judge. They wanted to ban, quote, any works that depict sex acts, regardless of any political, artistic, literary, and/or scientific value. One of the books is Ulysses, over a century after its first banning. I won't go into how ridiculous this is, given the much more explicit material easily available on the internet. But it is a reminder that Ulysses is still infamous for its open depiction of sex, for its honest depiction of sex. But what Joyce's work shows about sexuality is that our society, like his, typically uses the wrong categories to create its taxonomy of sexual differences. Male and female, gay and straight, these differences aren't the ones that matter. What matters is the dynamic of the relationship itself. And there are two main kinds of relationships: a competitive relationship that is about asserting power over the other in a way pleasurable to oneself alone, and a cooperative relationship in which two aware and willing participants engage in activities of mutual exploration, masquerade, and discovery. It is only the second kind that can make love. The worlds of Joyce's last two books remind us that the desirable and the destructive, Eros and Thanatos, are inextricably interwoven. Love of family is almost always psychically incestuous, and the love of the other trembles on the brink of becoming familial, since marriage turns lovers into family. Well-being is precarious. Love easily tips over into hate. Existence is consuming all of us, even as we survive by killing and consuming other things. Feminism, as a crusade to recognize the ways that society warps and handcuffs classes of people in the interest of preserving stability, is as important for men as women, for the normative as well as those deemed deviant. Deviant from what? The imagination is a dream under control. Or to put it another way, a dream is imagination gone wild. What loving actions are possible under such conditions? How does one succeed in experiencing pleasure while doing minimal harm? One answer, suggested by Joyce's oeuvre, is to keep reading literature that is challenging. Literature, as imagination subjected to design, puts readers in touch with a multitude of desires and possibilities that are real but virtual, so they cannot be destructive. Another prescription is to recall that the mouth is androgynous, composed of penetrating teeth, male, as well as a moist cavern, female, a fact that warns readers not to over-identify with one gender over the other, lest we polarize further into nursemaids and gang members. Finally, one can recall the beauty of the kiss. As Stephen asks, what did that mean to kiss? Why did people do that with their two faces? When he is writing a poem in Proteus, he is careful to make it clear that both people need to be involved in the kissing. Quote, mouth to her kiss. No, must be two of them. Glue 'em well. Mouth to her mouth's kiss. And Molly thinks there's nothing like a kiss, long and hot, down to your soul. The memory that unites Bloom and Molly and Ulysses is their recollection of their kiss on Hoth. The kiss is designed to be mutual, free of violence, hermaphroditic. The sex of the person kissing and being kissed doesn't matter. It has all the pleasure of eating without its violence. It is a powerful mode of communication, since the mouth is also where speech originates. Joyce's connection with the reader, I would argue, is that kind of kiss, androgynous, mutual, and best performed with a reader who participates equally and willingly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicki. That was tremendously interesting. If people have questions, if you can put them in the Q&A function, if you just want to add them to the chat too, I can easily see them there. That's fine if that's easier for you to work with. Um, this is all right. Yeah, I had so many ideas, so many things that I would say, or comments or questions that I had to come up in my head. But I'm gonna back that up. And someone in the chat uh had said that they were looking to get started on reading Joyce, and this is the introduction to this person, which I love. But then also there was some discussion of where to start. Should someone start with Ulysses? Does it matter where you start with Joyce?
Actually, that's a great question. And it kind of comes back to the Rosenbach, that what helps most in reading Joyce is not to do it alone, you know, because you're being disoriented. And it's really helpful to be disoriented with other people who are also being disoriented. So I would say that's more important than where you start. I mean, don't start with Finnegan's Wake. That's
Yeah, that was mentioned. Don't start there. Um, I agree that, it took me, I had not read Ulysses until I started at the Rosenbach, and then it became, well, I really need to do this. But it was in a class of people, in a group of people, and you could take that at the Rosenbach. You could just organize on your own and get some people together, and you could all, read Portrait or Ulysses together. But that's interesting because also I know as part of your book, The Joyce of Everyday Life, I think it is you talk about how to actively read, and that Joyce kind of, I don't know, demands isn't the right word, but but the best way to approach Joyce is to know that you are in kind of an active participant in the text. Am I kind of forming that correctly?
absolutely. You know, the word perform means to finish making it. And you have to perform um, while you read Joyce. You can't just sit back. Anyone who's read any Joyce knows that. You actually have to be actively engaged in trying to figure out what he's doing and why he's doing it. In one of the things I've written, I compared them to why Jesus talked in parables. I think it's a similar kind of psychology that um, if you just hear somebody tell you something, there's something passive about that that doesn't involve you with the same energy as when it's a puzzle. And Joyce was very interested in that idea of the puzzle as that which um, lures people into participating.
If anyone has any questions, again, please add them to the chat or the Q&A, and we will get to them. We'll have just a few more minutes here. Um, I especially like as you were finishing there, talking about, kind of sexuality and or sex in Ulysses, and this kind of how Joyce portrays it as this cooperative act. That seems to me to be that's reading the text
Yes,
as well, right?
exactly.
All righty. What Tell me a little bit about beginning this new Joyce. Was your new book kind of years in the making, like you had been leading up to this, and these are thoughts you finally wanted to put down in a book form?
Well, I started this 25 years ago. So it was a long, I mean, and I wrote lots of other things in the
Yeah.
interim, but I really wrote each piece individually, and I often lectured on it and listened to people's responses to it, and then revised it, and and so and I it came from lectures that I gave all over the world. I mean, parts of it were given in New Zealand, parts in Dublin. Um, anyway, it was a fantastic experience writing it.
Lynn has a question. Are you experiencing any of the pushback against Ulysses? And if so, how are you answering this attempt at censorship given the topics current in your current book?
Um, I have always experienced pushback against Ulysses. You cannot teach Joyce without, getting um, a healthy portion of pushback against Ulysses, but not usually for sex. I think I say this in the book, but actually, students didn't tend to react against the sex as much as they reacted against Bloom's defecating. So, for
Yeah.
some reason, that was much more upsetting to most students. Although recently that changed a little bit. About 3 years ago, during the pandemic, maybe 4 years ago, I was teaching Ulysses, and for the first time, two male students, when they got to Nausicaa, said that now they weren't sure for a while, but now they knew that Bloom was a bad man. you know so and I didn't see that coming at all, and it
Well,
was not just one but two of these students, so that they got very judgmental at Bloom, not at Joyce, but at Bloom, for masturbating anyway. So, and
wow.
I know that's the kind of pushback I've been getting most recently.
That's interesting. That's the kind of pushback I like when I'm, teaching books to people that, that they're so involved that, that they're judging characters and they're really paying attention to what they're doing and how that impacts them. I like that. Um, Naina asks, she says, I love that perspective that performance is a completion and that all readers are performers. Can you speak about the reader as performer and the way you began the fictive veil of reality? Would you describe all of Joyce's characters and his narrative self-construct as readers?
Oh, interesting. I don't know if I can answer all of that. I can answer the part about me, which is that I've told some of you this before, that I hated Joyce when I first picked him up. But hating is a form of engagement. It's active. It's not passive. And the important thing is that I wanted to come back for more, and to hate him some more, and to engage. And that's actually how I got interested. I thought, like a lot of people, I thought that he was flaunting his erudition. I thought he was not being considerate enough of the reader by talking about Ireland as if I knew anything about Ireland, which at the time I didn't. I knew a little bit about Catholicism, and even less about Judaism, So, but all of these things became things that I wanted to learn more and more about. And that's actually what Joyce has the potential to do for us, is to ignite curiosity about things that you might not have known nearly enough about, and that are really important, to engage with. Um, Bloom isn't that much of a reader. So, in terms of Joyce's characters, it's interesting. Molly is not that much of a reader. It's the young people that read primarily. And Stephen's reading is a lot of philosophy. He likes theology. He particularly likes heretics. And Gertie McDowell likes women's magazines. So, but what they're reading, in a way, has to do with um, airbrushing their own self-image. I mean, Stephen, that's not quite true of Stephen, because he's actually an excellent reader as long as he's reading outward as opposed to reading inward.
Mhm. Michael has a question. When you spoke of Joyce challenging expectations in terms of things like religion, fidelity, heroism, well, that seems to perhaps challenge a reader's ideas, which would provide a kind of mirror. But those mirrors, which would really make us look at the question of who we are and the fictions of ourselves, seems like something different.
Um,
More of
can
a
you?
comment than a question.
Yeah.
Um,
That's right. That I think what I'm trying to say is that not only do the mirrors make us look at ourselves and the ways in which we are not paying attention to who we really are. This is where the dislike of defecating comes in. You know, people that object to seeing a representation of defecation haven't paid attention to the fact that they defecate. You know, that's but one of the things that Joyce also does is hold a mirror up to the culture, and that's really where things like fidelity and love and so forth come in, because a lot of our fictions about what these things are misleading and dangerous potentially.
Michael actually continued that in another note here. He said, "Is there something different or other techniques Joyce uses to accomplish these self-examinations?"
Other than writing these books, no,
Or
yeah.
maybe than other books or authors do, perhaps.
Um, yeah, I, I I don't really know how to answer that. I can answer a different question, which is that something made Joyce get more and more hermetic as his career went on, more and more difficult to read, to require, additional labor from the reader. So there must have been a disappointment, even though Dubliners got beaten back into pulp by the printer and delayed in its publication. Um, I think, I mean, Joyce probably noticed that Nausicaa was one of the easiest chapters to read, and that's the one that got Ulysses banned. So he makes the investment more and more challenging as time goes on, I think in part because of the pushback that he got against the clearer representations of the kinds of issues that he was interested in unveiling.
Mhm. We'll go with this as a actually we have two last questions. I'll do them. Uh I'll do this one first. From Nat, we're celebrating Ulysses as we approach Bloomsday, but might you talk more about how we move from Ulysses into Finnegan's Wake? How do we read differently, or does Ulysses teach us how to read the Wake?
Hmm.
Does anything teach us how to read the Wake?
No, I mean because the wake is unreadable. You just and that's actually part of its value. That I love to say that you can't read the wake alone. It just can't be done.
Yeah.
Even Joyce didn't write it alone. He sat in the library and he listened to other people talk, and he assembled huge amounts of contexts and different languages to be able to create it in the way that he did. Um, but I love that. I love the fact that he's devised a way of reading that has to be cooperative. It can't be competitive. It can't be me saying, "Hey, I'm an expert. What do you know?" You know what I mean? Even when I teach the wake, I'm not an expert. I'm just somebody that's less dismayed by it because I've spent more time with it. Um, and that, it's just what other people are able to bring to it that lights up different aspects, and you can never really get what it's about. It's a little bit like the globe on which it's modeled, or, the unconscious mind.
Final question from Tom. How do you think your own reading of Joyce has changed over the years?
Massively, massively. It's interesting because I think I have grown into it. It's not like, Yeah, I think that's the best way I can explain it. I think I have grown around it. I have grown into it, and I've learned I've learned to deepen my compassion. I've learned to enlarge my imagination, increase my curiosity. I mean, I owe a lot to it.
Lenny Steiner had I'll throw this into the end here. Lenny had a great reader of Joyce, who you mentioned in your talk, wrote here. I think of the quote you make reference to: "Language is the Trojan horse through which the universe enters the mind."
It's a great one, isn't it? That's Hugh Kenner.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Vicky. This was absolutely tremendous. I'm so happy we asked you to do this year. I'm so happy you did this for us this year. This is certainly something that I'm happy to add to our digital content, and that people can watch from, yeah, for years to come as they approach Ulysses for the first time, or Joyce for the first time in general. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining us this year for our annual Bloomsday virtual talk. I hope you will join us at the Rosenbach on June 16th for Bloomsday. If you can't make it, we will be live streaming the Molly soliloquy at the end of the day. That starts at 7 p.m. Eastern on June 16th. Thank you all for joining us. And if you're looking for more literary, historical, or cultural engagement, head on over to the Rosenbach website and check out our other programs and courses we have, where you can sign up to read Joyce with other people. I invite you to please support the Rosenbach, and you can do that by donation, or if you're not already a member, I invite you to join. Thanks, Vicki. Farewell, readers. Thanks for joining us, and have a very happy Bloomsday. I will put up a title card to end this and leave that up for a little bit if there's anything that anyone wants, any links you want in the chat to grab for the next minute or so. Thanks, Vicki. Good night.